"Is this a joke?" Sheriff Frank Brody sneered, his voice a gravelly boom that filled the hushed courtroom. "You think you can arrest me?" They thought it was over. The terrified young woman in the defendant's chair, Maria Flores, thought her life was over. The gallery, filled with Brody's cronies and a few fearful townspeople, thought the verdict was a foregone conclusion. Even the judge, weary and cynical, thought this was just another Tuesday in a county run by one man. They had no idea the quiet, unassuming man in the cheap suit was about to rewrite the law in Oakhaven County. The air in courtroom 3B was a stale cocktail of floor, wax, old paper, and quiet desperation. It was a place designed to diminish a person, with its towering mahogany judge's bench and unforgiving fluorescent lights that hummed with a monotonous, oppressive drone. Sunlight struggled through the tall, grimy windows, succeeding only in illuminating the dust motes dancing in the heavy silence. Elias Vance sat at the defense table, a study in deliberate mediocrity. His suit, a shade of brown that seemed to absorb light, was a size too big in the shoulders and a fraction too short at the cuffs. His wire-rimmed glasses were perpetually slipping down his nose, and he pushed them back with a slow, thoughtful finger. To any casual observer, he was the embodiment of an overworked. He felt the weight of every eye in the room. He felt the contempt rolling off Sheriff Frank Brody in palpable waves. He let it wash over him. It was fuel. Across the room, Sheriff Brody was everything. Elias was not. His uniform was crisply pressed, the fabric strained across a barrel chest and a formidable gut. His silver badge was polished to a blinding sheen, a tiny sun of authority pinned over his heart. He did not sit. He occupied his chair at the prosecution's table as if it were a throne. His thick arms crossed, a smirk cemented on his face. Brody looked at the kid. That's what he was. Some charity case the state sent over to represent the little thug. Maria. He could smell the weakness on him, the cheap fabric, the scent of fear. This would be easy. Another piece of property seized under the asset forfeiture statutes. Another victory for his department, another fat deposit into his discretionary fund. He owned this room. He owned the judge, the bailiffs, the whole damn county. This boy was just a fly to be swatted. The Honorable Judge Thompson peered down from his perch, his face a mask of tired indifference. He was a man who had seen too much and had decided to see less. He ran his courtroom on autopilot, letting the powerful do as they pleased as long as the paperwork was in order. The court calls Case 734B. The People versus Maria Flores. The bailiff's voice droned. Maria Flores, seated next to Elias, flinched as if struck. She was 19, her face pale with terror. Her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She looked like a frightened bird, trapped in a cage of polished wood and legal jargon she could not comprehend. The charge was possession, with intent to distribute a Schedule II narcotic, a ridiculous trumped-up accusation. The narcotics had been found in the trunk of a car she had borrowed, planted there by Brody's deputies so they could seize her family's farm. A prime piece of real estate developers had been drooling over for years. It was a story as old as power itself. The strong taking from the weak, using the color of law as their weapon. Elias had seen this story play out 100 times in 100 different towns. Today he was writing a new ending. The preliminary hearing began, a tedious dance of legal formalities. The assistant district attorney, a young man named Peterson who owed his career to Brody, presented the state's case with a practiced, hollow confidence. He called his first witness to the stand. The prosecution calls Sheriff Frank Brody. Brody moved with the swagger of a man who knew he was untouchable. He took the oath with one hand on the Bible and the other metaphorically on the throat of everyone in the room. The wood of the witness stand creaked under his weight. Peterson led him through a well-rehearsed script. The anonymous tip, the routine traffic stop, the suspicious behavior of the defendant. Brody's voice was a smooth, deep baritone, the voice of a man used to being believed. He delivered his lines with the perfect mix of weary professionalism and civic duty. He lied. He lied with every breath, with every carefully chosen word. His testimony was a masterpiece of fiction, constructed to be airtight, impenetrable. He glanced at Maria, his eyes cold and hard, a silent message of her complete and utter helplessness. Then his gaze shifted to Elias. He saw the kid scribbling on a yellow legal pad, and a sneer tugged at his lips. Let the boy take his little notes. They were meaningless. He was just a speed bump on the road to victory. Elias did not look up. His pen moved across the page in a neat, precise script. He wasn't just taking notes. He was conducting a symphony. Each of Brody's lies was a note, and Elias was arranging them into a composition of self-incrimination. He noted the time of the supposed traffic stop, 10:17 p.m. He noted the patrol car number Brody claimed to be in Unit 7. He noted the exact phrasing of the confession Brody claimed Maria had blurted out. He felt no anger, no fear, only a cold crystalline focus. His heart beat with the slow, steady rhythm of a ticking clock. A clock counting down the final minutes of Sheriff Frank Brody's career. The prosecution. Judge Thompson turned his gaze to the defense table, his expression bored. Mr. Vance, you may cross-examine the witness. Elias stood slowly. He left his notepad on the table. He did not need it. Every fact, every date, every lie was etched into his memory, stored in a perfectly organized mental file. He walked towards the witness stand, his footsteps unnervingly quiet on the worn linoleum floor. He stopped a respectful distance away, his posture still slightly slumped, his expression mild. "Sheriff Brody," he began, his voice soft, almost deferential. "Thank you for your testimony. I just have a few small points of clarification for the record," Elias continued, his tone placid. "You stated you were in Unit 7 on the night of the arrest. Is that correct?" "That's what I said, son," Brody replied, the word son dripping with condescension. "And Unit 7 is a standard-issue Ford Crown Victoria, equipped with a dashboard camera system, as is department policy." A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe caution crossed, Brody's face before being replaced by his usual arrogance. "That's right, but the camera was malfunctioning that night." Power flicker. It was a standard lazy lie, one he had used a dozen times before. It always worked. A power flicker. "I see," Elias said, nodding thoughtfully. "And the anonymous tip you received, it came in on your personal cell phone, not through the official dispatch line?" Brody's eyes narrowed. "I take tips wherever I can get 'em. Good police work means being available 24/7. "Of course," Elias said, his voice still gentle, "and this good police work led you to perform the traffic stop at exactly 10:17 p.m. As you testified to the minute," Brody said, puffing out his chest. "This kid was wasting his time, nibbling at the edges of a rock-solid case." It was pathetic. Judge Thompson sighed audibly. "Mr. Vance, do you have a point, or are you just enjoying the sound of your own voice?" Elias turned to the judge, offering a small, apologetic smile. "Just one more point of clarification, Your Honor. Then I'll be done." He turned back to Brody. The meekness began to recede from his posture, like a tide pulling away from the shore, revealing something hard and unyielding beneath. "Sheriff," Elias's voice lost its softness. The Oakhaven County Sheriff's Department upgraded its entire fleet to Dodge Chargers 3 months ago. The Crown Victorias were all sold at auction. Unit 7, specifically, was sold to a scrapyard in the next state. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the courtroom. The incessant hum of the lights suddenly seemed deafening. Brody's smirk faltered. We keep a few of the old cars in reserve for special operations." It was a weak lie, and he knew it. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. Elias ignored him. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "the dashboard camera systems in the new Chargers, they have an independent encrypted battery source that records for 72 hours continuously. A power flicker is a physical impossibility." Brody's face began to flush a deep, mottled red. He gripped the wooden rail of the witness stand. "Now you listen here." Elias cut him off, his voice like cracking ice. "And finally, Sheriff, at 10:17 p.m. on the night in question, your personal cell phone, the one you received the anonymous tip on, was not in Oakhaven County. It was pinging off a cell tower 50 miles away at the private residence of a real estate developer who has a $7 million standing offer on the Flores family farm. Bang! The word hung in the air, more potent than any gunshot. Brody stared at Elias, his mouth slightly agape. The kid's eyes, behind the cheap glasses, were no longer mild. They were like chips of flint, cold and dangerous. This wasn't a public defender. He had made a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. Judge Thompson sat bolt upright in his chair, his boredom vaporized, replaced by a look of utter shock. He stared from Elias to the sputtering sheriff. "Now it was time to close it. You're out of your league, kid," Brody snarled, his voice a low growl. He was falling back on his most trusted weapon, intimidation. He pushed himself to his feet in the witness box, a blatant act of aggression. "I am the law in this room," he roared, pointing a thick, trembling finger at Elias. "And I say, this thug. And you're one more smart-mouthed word." Away from being held in contempt in my jail, he had just confessed on the record. In open court, in front of a dozen witnesses, he had admitted to being the ultimate authority above the evidence, above the truth. He had threatened an officer of the court. It was more than Elias could have hoped for. Elias didn't flinch. He simply stood there, a pillar of calm in the hurricane of Brody's rage. He let the sheriff's final damning words echo in the stunned silence. Then he slowly, deliberately, turned his back on the witness stand. He faced Judge Thompson directly. The slouch was gone. His shoulders were squared. He stood with an authority that seemed to radiate from him, filling the space around him. The ill-fitting suit suddenly seemed irrelevant, a costume shed to reveal the man beneath. "Your Honor," Elias said, and his voice was a new instrument entirely. It was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of absolute power. "The defense moves to dismiss all charges against my client, Miss Maria Flores, with prejudice." Judge Thompson, still reeling, could only stammer. On. "What grounds, Counselor?" "On the grounds of malicious prosecution, conspiracy to commit fraud, and fabrication of evidence by the state's primary witness," Elias stated, his voice ringing with clarity. "And on the grounds that the arresting officer has just committed perjury, confessed to falsifying evidence, and threatened counsel on a live court record." Brody let out a strangled laugh. "You can't prove any of that." Elias turned his head slightly, fixing Brody with a chillingly calm gaze. "Sheriff, I can prove every word, and so much more." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, high-end digital audio recorder. He held it up for the entire court to see. "This," he announced, is a recording of your conversation 2 nights ago with Deputy Miller, where you instructed him to plant the evidence in Miss Flores's vehicle and to falsify the arrest report. A conversation where you detailed exactly how the profits from the land seizure would be divided. Brody's face drained of all color. It went from crimson to a ghastly, pasty white in a heartbeat. He looked at the bailiffs, his men, his loyal soldiers. They stood frozen, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion, looking not at him, but at the unassuming man in the cheap brown suit. No one was coming to save him. Sheriff Frank Brody sneered, his voice cracking. A desperate attempt to regain control. "You think you can arrest me?" "No, Sheriff," Elias said, his voice dropping to a soft, lethal whisper. "I know I can." He turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, pursuant to Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, deprivation of rights under color of law, and Title 18, Section 1512, tampering with a witness, victim, or an informant, I am placing Sheriff Frank Brody under arrest." "Contempt!" Judge Thompson roared, slamming his gavel. The sound cracked like a rifle shot. "Mr. Vance, you are in contempt of this court. I will have you." His words were cut short. The main courtroom doors swung open with a resounding bang. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in immaculate dark business suits, strode into the room. They moved with a fluid, purposeful grace that spoke of years of training. Their eyes swept the room, assessing, cataloging, and dismissing every person there as a non-threat. The woman in the lead, Agent Sarah Jenkins, held up her credentials for the stunned bailiff to see. The gold FBI shield gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She walked directly to the defense table, her heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the floor. She gave Elias a brief, professional nod. Then she addressed the bench. "Your Honor," Agent Jenkins said, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the thick atmosphere of disbelief. "My apologies for the interruption, but this man," she gestured towards Elias, "is not a public defender named Mr. Vance." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "He is Assistant United States Attorney Elias Vance, head of the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section Task Force. He has been operating undercover in your county for the last 6 months as the lead federal prosecutor in an investigation into systemic corruption within the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Maria Flores stared at Elias, her eyes wide with a dawning miraculous understanding. Judge Thompson's jaw hung open, his face a perfect picture of astonishment. And Sheriff Frank Brody. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground crumble away beneath his feet. He staggered back, his hand instinctively going towards the butt of his holstered service weapon. It was a fatal mistake. Before Brody's fingers could even brush against the cold steel, Elias moved. He wasn't the slow, slightly clumsy man from before. He exploded into motion with a grace and speed that was utterly breathtaking. His left hand shot out, not to grab, but to gently deflect Brody's arm, redirecting its momentum. In the same fluid motion, his right hand seized Brody's wrist, twisting it in a precise, controlled lock that sent a jolt of pain up the larger man's arm. Elias spun, using Brody's own weight and forward momentum against him, turning him around and slamming him face first against the witness stand. The impact sent a heavy thud echoing through the silent room. Before the sheriff could even utter a cry of pain or surprise, Elias had his hands behind his back. Click, click! The metallic sound of the handcuffs, ratcheting shut, was the final, definitive sound of a corrupt king being dethroned. Elias stepped back, his breathing even, his cheap suit not even wrinkled. He had neutralized a man twice his size in less than 2 seconds without breaking a sweat. The 2 male FBI agents advanced, taking custody of the now cuffed and utterly broken sheriff. They pulled him to his feet. Brody's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, his eyes wide with the horror of his complete and total ruin. You can't do this," he stammered, his voice a pathetic whimper. "I'm the sheriff." As the agents began to lead him away, Elias leaned in close, his face just inches from Brody's. His voice was so quiet that only the sheriff could hear it, a terrifyingly private execution. "You told Judge Thompson that the law in this room was whatever you said it was," Elias whispered, his breath cold against Brody's ear. "You were wrong. The law is the law, and today it has come for you." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Enjoy federal prison, Frank. I hear they're not very fond of dirty cops." The agents frog-marched him down the center aisle, past the stunned faces of his former cronies, past the tearful, relieved face of Maria Flores, and out the courtroom doors. The doors swung shut, leaving behind a silence more profound than any before it. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, a perfect storm of legal and social destruction that obliterated every trace of Frank Brody's life and legacy. It was not just a takedown, it was an erasure. The federal indictment, unsealed by Agent Jenkins moments after the arrest, was a sprawling, 60-page document of breathtaking corruption. It named not only Brody, but 12 of his senior deputies. The charges were a roll call of federal crimes: racketeering under the RICO Act, conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights, wire fraud, money laundering, and a litany of evidence tampering and witness intimidation counts. The local news station, which had once fawned over Sheriff Brody as a local hero, led their 6 o'clock broadcast with a banner that screamed, "Sheriff Broken Badge, Brody arrested in Dramatics courtroom sting." The story went national overnight. The image of the swaggering sheriff being led away in cuffs by an unassuming public defender was irresistible. Elias Vance, despite the DOJ's attempts to keep him out of the spotlight, became a momentary folk hero, the ghost of Oak Haven. Brody's professional world imploded. He was immediately suspended without pay, a formality before his inevitable conviction. His pension, built on 2 decades of graft and abuse, was frozen and ultimately forfeited to the federal government as part of the RICO seizure. His loyal deputies, facing decades in federal prison, fell over one another to be the first to cut a deal with a USA Vance. They sang like canaries, revealing crimes even the FBI's meticulous investigation had missed. The thin blue line did not bend. It shattered into a million self-serving pieces. His personal life disintegrated with equal speed and brutality. His wife, a woman who had enjoyed the lavish lifestyle funded by her husband's crimes, filed for divorce within 48 hours, her lawyer citing irreparable public humiliation and moral turpitude. She cleaned out their joint bank accounts, the ones the feds hadn't already frozen, and vanished. His friends, the powerful business owners, and local politicians who had benefited from his protection. His calls from jail went unanswered. The financial ruin was absolute. The legal fees to fight a federal RICO case were astronomical. He burned through his hidden savings in a matter of weeks. His assets, the sprawling ranch, the luxury pickup truck, the boat, were all seized by the government as proceeds of criminal activity. In the ultimate, bitterest irony, Frank Brody, the man who had mocked and tormented countless public defenders, was declared indigent. The court was forced to appoint one to represent him. All charges against Maria Flores were dropped with a formal public apology from the State Attorney General's office. The federal investigation led to the overturning of 17 other wrongful convictions tied to Brody's department. The asset forfeiture program in Oak Haven was suspended indefinitely, and the case became a catalyst for statewide reform of the very laws Brody had so gleefully abused. The system, slowly and painfully, began to cleanse itself. Months later, Elias Vance stood in his actual office. It was a world away from the oppressive gloom of Courtroom 3B. Located on the top floor of the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C., it was a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Capitol building. The scent was of clean filtered air and freshly brewed coffee, not old paper and fear. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple dark blue tie. The cheap glasses were gone, replaced by a pair that fit his face perfectly. He was on the phone, a new case file open on his expansive mahogany desk. "The plea deals are all signed, Sarah," he said, his voice the calm, authoritative instrument it had always been. "Brody's deputies gave us everything. He's facing a mandatory minimum of 30 years. He'll die in a federal supermax." He listened for a moment, a faint smile touching his lips, as Agent Jenkins spoke on the other end of the line. "No, he never saw it coming," Elias continued, his gaze drifting towards the Capitol dome, gleaming white in the afternoon sun. "Men like Brody, they get so used to their power that they forget what it's for. They think the badge makes them a king." He leaned back in his leather chair, the view of the nation's capital sprawling before him. "A badge is supposed to be a shield for the innocent, Sarah," he said softly, the words a summary of his entire creed. "When a man tries to turn it into a hammer to crush the weak, you have no choice. You have to take the hammer away from him. You have to break it so it can never be used to hurt anyone again." He listened again, then nodded. "Right, the preliminary report on that West Texas." Elias ended the call and placed the phone gently back in its cradle. He stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the city below. For a moment, he allowed himself a sliver of satisfaction for Maria Flores, for the 17 others exonerated, for a small county in the middle of nowhere that could finally breathe free. Then, the moment passed. He turned away from the window, walked back to his desk, and picked up the new case file. He opened it and began to read. The work never ended. What an incredible story. Assistant United States Attorney Elias Vance, disguised as a down-on-his-luck public defender, proved that true justice isn't about the uniform you wear or the power you wield, but about the integrity you hold. Sheriff Brody thought he was untouchable, a king in his own little kingdom, but karma came for him in the form of a quiet, brilliant man who used the law not as a weapon, but as the shield. It was always meant to be. If you loved watching this arrogant bully get exactly what he deserved, please smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel reach more people who enjoy these satisfying stories of justice. Share this video with anyone who loves a satisfying story of karma being served cold in a courtroom. Everyone knows someone who would cheer at that epic takedown. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our daily drama and revenge stories. We post new videos every single day, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let me know in the comments below, what would you have done if you were in Elias Vance's shoes? Would you have had the patience to set such a perfect trap? I can't wait to read your thoughts. See you in the next video.